A young millionaire saw a barefoot boy on the sidewalk and decided to give him a chance. When the boy's mother saw the $10,000 he brought home, she burst into tears. The asphalt burned Jamal's bare feet. He shifted his weight on the dirty sidewalk, trying to find a cooler spot. But the summer heat had turned every inch of concrete into a griddle. His toes were covered in blisters from walking. Without shoes for the past week, a garbage truck rumbled past, making the ground vibrate. Jamal pulled his knees closer to his chest, watching as bits of paper swirled in the truck's wake. His t-shirt, 3 sizes too big and full of holes, hung loose on his skinny frame. "Be good, baby," his mother had said that morning, her eyes red from another sleepless night. "I'll try to be home early today." Jamal had just nodded, knowing it wasn't true. Sophia hadn't come home early in months. She couldn't afford to work less than 12 hours. Sometimes 14, cleaning other people's houses. "You got anything to eat?" she'd ask, checking their empty fridge for the 3rd time. "I'm good, Mama, don't worry." She touched his face, then her work rough hands gentle against his cheek. "My brave boy." Now, 6 hours later, Jamal's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. The convenience store owner on the corner sometimes gave him day-old hot dogs, but today the mean one was working the guy who called the cops on kids like him. Jamal stood up, his feet screaming in protest. Time to check the recycling bins behind the strip mall. He'd made $8 yesterday from aluminum cans. Today, if he was lucky, he might find enough to buy some bread and maybe even a cheap pair of shoes from the dollar store. The sun beat down as he limped toward the first dumpster. The smell hit him before he got there, rotting vegetables mixed with something worse. He held his breath and reached in, feeling around for anything that might be worth something. Well, look who we got here." Jamal's heart stopped. He knew that voice. Marcus, the 17-year-old dropout who ran collections for the local gang. "Just looking for cans," Jamal said, trying to keep his voice steady. Marcus leaned against the dumpster, a cigarette dangling from his lips. 2 other boys flanked him, both wearing the same red bandanas. "You know the rules, little man. 20% of whatever you make goes to us for protection." "I haven't found anything yet." Marcus grabbed Jamal's arm, twisting it. "Don't lie to me. I saw you yesterday with those cans. Where's our cut? I needed it for food," Jamal said, wincing at the pain. Your mama ain't our problem." Marcus twisted harder. "You got till tomorrow to pay up double for making us wait. That's $3. Jamal's voice cracked. "But that's tomorrow," Marcus said, shoving him against the dumpster. "Or we'll find you, and trust me, you don't want that." They walked away laughing, leaving Jamal rubbing his arm. $3, it might as well have been 3,000. He slumped down next to the dumpster, the image of his father flashing through his mind. 2 years ago, James Wilson had left for his construction job. Like any other day, he'd kissed Sophia goodbye, ruffled Jamal's hair, and promised to take them to the movies that weekend. 6 hours later, 2 police officers showed up at their door. No safety harness, 30-story, fall dead before he hit the ground. The construction company gave them $5,000 to keep quiet. The money lasted 4 months. After that, everything fell apart. Jamal wiped his eyes with his grimy sleeve and kept searching. By late afternoon, his garbage bag was half full of cans, maybe $2 worth. Not enough for Marcus, not enough for food, definitely not enough for shoes. The walk home took 40 minutes. Their apartment building rose up like a gray tombstone covered in graffiti and missing half its windows. The elevator hadn't worked in years, so Jamal climbed 5 flights of stairs, his feet leaving bloody prints on the concrete steps. He knew something was wrong before he reached their door. The apartment was darker than usual. He flicked the light switch. "Nothing happened, Mama, in here." Baby Sophia's voice came from the kitchen. She sat at their wobbly table, staring at a piece of paper and overdue electricity bill. "They cut it off?" Jamal asked, even though he knew the answer. Sophia nodded, her shoulders shaking. $300. They want $300 to turn it back on. She looked up, her eyes shining with tears. "I tried to work out a payment plan, but they wouldn't allow it." Knock cut her off. 3 sharp raps that made the thin door rattle in its frame. "Mrs. Wilson, open up." Jamal recognized Mr. Thompson's voice, the landlord. So Sophia quickly wiped her eyes and went to the door. Mr. Thompson filled the doorway, his bulk blocking. What little light came from the hallway, he looked past Sophia taking in the dark apartment with a sneer. Rent's 2 months. Late, he said without preamble. That's $800 you owe me, Mr. Thompson, please. Sophia started. I get paid next week. If you could just next week, he laughed, but there was no humor in it. You said that last week and the week before. He jabbed a thick finger at her. You got 7 days to come up with the money, or you and your boy can find somewhere else to live. Where are we supposed to go? Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. Not my problem. Mr. Thompson turned to leave, then looked back. 7 days, and tell your kid to stop bleeding all over my stairs. The door slammed shut. Sophia stood there for a long moment, her hand still on the doorknob. Then her legs gave out, and she slid to the floor, sobbing. Jamal went to her, wrapping his skinny arms around her shoulders. They sat there in the growing darkness, mother and son, while outside the city rumbled on, indifferent to their pain. 3 days' worth of collecting cans sat in his garbage bag. $2 that wouldn't make a dent in what they needed tomorrow. Marcus would come looking for his money. Mr. Thompson would be back in a week, and somewhere in the city his father's ghost haunted empty construction sites, forever falling through safety nets that should have been there. Jamal held his mother tighter, feeling her tears soak through his thin shirt. Tomorrow he would try again. Tomorrow he would figure something out. Tomorrow had to be better, but tonight in the dark apartment that might not be there as much longer, tomorrow felt very far away. The morning sun found Jamal back on his sidewalk spot, his stomach twisted with hunger. 18 hours since his last meal. He'd given his mother the last slice of bread before she left for work. Don't do anything stupid today, she'd whispered, hugging him tight. Promise me. He promised, but sitting there watching people drive past in their nice cars, he wondered how long he could keep that promise. 3 other kids from his building had started stealing from the mall last month. They had new shoes now. Their mothers didn't cry at night. A black Mercedes crawled past, slowing near him. Jamal tensed. Nice cars usually meant trouble, either cops or rich people looking to cause problems. He kept his head down, hoping they'd move on. The car stopped. A door opened. Hey there, a man's voice said. You okay? Jamal didn't look up. I'm fine. It's about 90 degrees out here, and you don't have any shoes. Now Jamal did look up. The man stood a few feet away, tall, gray hair, expensive blue suit, but it was his eyes that caught Jamal's attention. They weren't angry or suspicious, just concerned. I'm Richard, the man said. What's your name? Why do you care? Richard smiled slightly. Because you're sitting on a burning sidewalk with no shoes, and I'd like to know why. Jamal studied him. No badge visible, no clipboard like the social workers carried, just a guy in a suit standing in the sun. Jamal, he said. Finally, nice to meet you, Jamal. Richard gestured to the diner across the street. Have you eaten today? Jamal's stomach growled traitorously. I'm not supposed to go anywhere with strangers, smart kid. Richard pulled out his wallet and held up a $20 bill. How about this? You pick the place anywhere you want. We sit where everyone can see us through the windows, and you can leave whenever you want. Jamal hesitated. His mother's warning echoed in his head, but so did her crying from last night. Joy, he said, pointing to the diner. They got cameras. Richard nodded approvingly. Good choice. The air conditioning hit Jamal like a wall as they entered. Joy's, the waitress Mary, who sometimes gave him free water, raised her eyebrows but said nothing as they slid into a booth by the window. Order whatever you want, Richard said, handing him a menu. Jamal's hands shook slightly as he opened it. Why are you doing this? Because someone did it for me once. Richard leaned back, loosening his tie. 30 years ago, I was sitting on a different sidewalk, just as hungry as you are now. You're lying. No shoes either, Richard continued, though I had it a bit easier. It was only 70 degrees that day. The waitress came over. Jamal ordered a cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate shake. His mother would say it was too much, but Richard just nodded encouragingly. What happened? Jamal asked. After Mary left 30 years ago, my father got sick. Cancer. Medical bills took everything we had. Then he died, and we lost the house. Richard's voice was matter of fact. My mother worked 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough. I started spending my days on the street, looking for ways to make money. The food arrived. Jamal forced himself to eat slowly, even though his stomach screamed for him to shove it all in at once. Then what a man Name Marcus Thompson found me. Jamal choked on his burger. Marcus different. Marcus Richard said this one owned a local business. He gave me a job sweeping his store, minimum wage under the table, but it was enough to help my mother keep our apartment. He paused. Want to tell me your story? Jamal took a long drink of his shake. Considering the food had cleared his head a bit, this could still be a trick. But something in Richard's voice, the way he talked about his father. My dad died too, Jamal said quietly. Construction accident, no safety gear. Richard's jaw tightened. The company paid us to shut up. Jamal pushed a fry through a puddle of ketchup. Money's gone now. Mama cleans houses, but it's not enough. Electric got cut off yesterday. Landlord's going to throw us out next week. How much do you need? Jamal looked up sharply. I'm not asking for, I know you're not. Richard's voice was gentle. I'm asking $8,800 for rent, $300 for electric. Jamal's voice cracked. And some guys, they want money too for protection. Local gang. Jamal nodded. How much do they want? $3. It sounded stupid saying it out loud. Double, 'cause I'm late. Richard was quiet for a moment. Finish your food, he said finally. Then I'd like to meet your mother. She's working. When does she get home? Usually around 8. I'll come by then. Richard pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. That's my cell number. And here he counted out 5 singles for your protection fee, plus some extra. Jamal stared at the money. I can't. You can, and you will. Richard's voice was firm. Because if you don't pay them, they'll hurt you, and we need to buy time until we figure something out. Yes, we. Richard stood up. What's your address? Jamal hesitated, then wrote it on a napkin. Richard studied it. Building 4. Apartment 5. He read, I'll be there at 8. He started to leave, then turned back. Jamal, don't tell those guys where the money came from. Just pay them and stay away from them. Jamal watched through the window as Richard got into his Mercedes. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving him alone with an empty plate and $5 in his hand. Mary came over with a to-go box. Your friend left this paid for, she said, setting it down. Burger and fries for later. Jamal stared at the box, then at the money, then at Richard's business card. The name was simple, Richard Martinez, CEO. Below it, a phone number on the back. His cell phone. He stood up carefully, his feet still sore, but his stomach full. For the first time in days, outside the sidewalk was just as hot, but somehow it felt different, like maybe, just maybe, things could change. But first, he had to find Marcus and pay his debt. Then he had to figure out how to tell his mother that a stranger in a Mercedes wanted to help them. And somewhere in between, he had to decide if he could trust Richard Martinez, CEO, who claimed he once had no shoes of his own. The to-go box was worn warm in his hands as he started walking. 8 hours until Richard came. 8 hours to either hope or worry. 8 hours to wonder if this was the beginning of something better or just another cruel joke from a world that seemed to enjoy playing them. The landlord's voice boomed through the thin walls of apartment 5. See, you're running out of time, Mrs. Wilson. Jamal took the stairs, 2 at a time, still holding the to-go box. From Joyce, his mother's voice drifted down the hallway, pleading, please, Miss Thompson, just 2 more days. I've heard it all before. Jamal rounded the corner just as Mr. Thompson jabbed his finger in Sophia's face. 3 neighbors stood in their doorways watching. Mrs. Rodriguez from 5B clutched her rosary. Mr. Chen from 5A pretended to check his mail, though his mailbox was downstairs. Mama, Jamal called out. Sophia turned her eyes wide. She'd come home early. Something must have happened at work. Her uniform was stained and her hair had fallen from its usual neat bun. Your boy's here to watch you, begged Miss Thompson. Sneered. Good. Maybe he'll learn something about responsibility. Don't talk to my mama like that, Jamal said, his voice shaking. Mr. Thompson turned slowly. What did you say? I said, Jamal, please. Sophia grabbed his arm. Go inside, baby. Listen to your mother, boy. Mr. Thompson straightened his cheap tie. And remember, 5 days left. Then you can both, then they can both what? Everyone turned. Richard stood at the end of the hallway, his suit jacket draped over one arm. Even in the dim light, his presence filled the space. Who the hell are you, Mr. Thompson? Demanded Richard. Walked forward slowly, his shoes clicking on the dirty floor. Richard Martinez. And you are the owner of this building? Our Richard stopped beside Jamal and Sophia. And you always threaten your tenants in public. Mr. Thompson's face reddened. This Is private property you're trespassing? No, I'm a guest of the Wilsons. Richard smiled, but his eyes were hard. Why don't we take this conversation inside unless you prefer to conduct business in front of an audience? The neighbors quickly disappeared into their apartments. Mr. Thompson glanced between Richard's expensive suit and Sophia's worn uniform. Clearly recalculating. Fine, he growled, but make it quick. Inside the apartment, the lack of electricity made the afternoon shadows deep and threatened. Sophia fumbled with some candles, her hands shaking. Let me, Richard said gently, taking the matches. He lit 3 candles, placing them on the wobbly kitchen table. Their light revealed the water stains on the ceiling, the peeling wallpaper, the empty fridge humming uselessly in the corner. $800, Mr. Thompson said, still standing by the door. That's what they owe for 2 months' rent plus late fees. Richard nodded slowly. And the electricity? That's not my problem. No, but the broken window in the bedroom is, and the mold in the bathroom, and the rats I can hear in the walls. Richard's voice remained calm. I wonder what the housing authority would say about those. Mr. Thompson's face went from red to purple. Are you threatening me? Not at all. I'm suggesting we work something out. Richard sat down at the table, gesturing for others to join him. Mrs. Wilson needs time to get current on her rent. You need your money. I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone. Sophia stood by the sink, her arms wrapped around herself. Mr. Martinez, I don't know who you are or why you're here, but he bought me lunch. Mama, Jamal said quickly. He wants to help. Help? Sophia laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. Nobody helps baby, not anymore. I do. Richard looked at her steadily. Because 30 years ago someone helped me. Mr. Thompson snorted. Is this some kind of charity scam? No scam. Richard pulled out his wallet. How about this? I'll pay 1 month's rent right now. That gives Mrs. Wilson 30 days to arrange payment for the 2nd month, and in that time you fix the violations I mentioned. Or what? Or I make some calls. Richard's smile returned sharp as broken glass. I know several housing attorneys watching, he said quietly. They saw your car. Richard nodded. I expected they might. He turned to Sophia. Mrs. Wilson, your son told me about your situation, all of it. I'd like to help, but I know it's hard to trust strangers. Hard. Sophia looked up, her eyes fierce despite her tears. My husband trusted his bosses. They let him die. The company lawyer said he'd help us. He helped them. Buried the truth. The church said they'd help. Their prayers didn't pay our bills. Mama, Jamal started. No, baby. She stood up, her small frame straight and proud in the candlelight. Mr. Martinez, thank you for the rent money. I'll pay you back somehow, but we can't. A rock crashed through the window, sending glass everywhere. Jamal ducked. Richard moved faster than his suit suggested, pulling Sophia away from the spray of shards. You got money for rent, but not for us. Marcus's voice carried up from the street. Bad choice, little man. Richard went to the broken window. Careful of the glass. Stay here, he said firmly. Both of you. What are you going to do? Jamal asked. Talk to them. Richard straightened his tie. Sometimes that's all it takes. They'll hurt you. Sophia protested. No, Richard said simply. They won't. He left before they could argue. Sophia ran to the window, Jamal beside her. Below, Marcus and his crew squared up as Richard approached. 5 teenagers with nothing to lose against one businessman in an expensive suit come to save your charity.